Hello, and welcome back to our series where we are building a people and culture management system. This series is brought to you by Prairie HR Solutions. My name is Jake Finger, Principal Consultant. And in this video, I would like to create the update and archive functions for our record management piece. And once we get this part done, then we can go on to work on our other functions such as total rewards or operation or not operations but maybe some employee relations pieces or something like that. But before we were able to really dive into those analytical pieces and create things like the tables and the charts, we needed to ensure that we had a method to keep our records updated and clean, so to speak. So that's why we're starting off with this create, read, update, and in our case, archive functionality. So what we're wanting to have happen first is the user will retrieve a record, because we just don't want a individual to come in and say, okay, I want to update employee 39 and then just type like a random their last name in here and then hit update and then expect all these other things to keep and only update the last name. Now we could build that into the code, which would take us a pretty good amount of effort considering that we have 80 fields here. We'd have to check to see which one changed, and then keep the old stuff but update the new one and replace it. I mean, we could with Splice or whatever, but for now, we're just going to work on the basic functionality of going into our sheet, finding that record based on the employee ID. And we don't want to just overwrite that. What we first want to do is copy that, send it over to our archive tab, and then overwrite the record data. So to do that, first, we are going to need to have something happen when we hit update record. When somebody hits this update record and then mashes this button, we want it to do that. So we got to go over to our code first. And inside our process, our rec process action function, and if you haven't watched the previous videos, I highly suggest you go back and watch those videos, particularly the one where we created and retrieved or read our data. So we're finding our update record. Here we go. And we need to create a function. And that function, let's just keep it the same flow, I guess would be the word for it, of our previous functions there. So create, read, update. There we go. So now let's go create this function, this update record function. So let's come down here to our pieces. Here we go. We'll create a comment. Update. We'll create a function here. That function is going to be update record. And if you think about what it is that we're attempting to do, we've already done this to a degree. We are essentially wanting to get first our employee ID value, and then we're wanting to grab all of the values within all of our elements and put that into an array. And then we're wanting to send all of that stuff over to our Google Apps Script side, our server side, to do the actual work of updating and archiving. And we did this in our create record. Except this time we're not going to append a row, we're just going to overwrite. So what we can do is we can grab all of this for now, and then when we go back and do some cleanup work, we can work on these variables, making them a little bit easier to understand or not, doesn't really matter. And we don't actually need this input piece anymore because we've given essentially all of our fields that we want to pull this .recdd. So we can actually delete it from up here too. There we go. And here we go. So what we're wanting to do is create a variable called inputs, and that is going to store all of our fields with this recdd class that we gave it. And then we're creating another variable called leids. And what we're going to do is construct an array from these inputs, and we're going to filter the input by the ID, because right now it's grabbing everything. And we want to simply filter by the ID and then map that so we can use it down here. And what we're doing down here is we created a empty object called records. And for each one of these filtered and mapped IDs, we are wanting to go up and grab the value of each one of those and then store it in an object. So that looks good. And now we need to take all of this and send it over to our Google script side. Google script run, that's how we do it. Now we're not going to actually want to receive anything back from that. We just want it to essentially just do it on the back end and be done with it. We don't need any data returned. Not yet anyway. Maybe if we wanted to do something like a notification or something, it's been successfully updated, hooray, then we could do it with our success handler. But for now, let's just get it functional. So we're going to need to send information over to a function on our server side, and let's call that function modify record. And this function that we're sending it over to is going to need to take some information. And the one thing that we don't have here, I just realized, is our employee ID. So we need to come up here and grab that. Okay, good. Now this rec imp ID is the global variable that we set for this specific employee ID. It's right here, row 25. Now we don't have the value there. It's just this variable is simply just setting the focus to it. So that's why we are creating the value piece at the end. We're typing value and we're storing that in an imp ID. Okay, so the first piece of information, the obvious piece of information that we're going to need to receive is our records. Piece here. So let's type records. And then the other piece we're going to need is our LEIDs. And the reason we're going to need our LEIDs, our element IDs, is because this is coming over to us. This will be coming over to us as an object. And if you remember when we were creating that create function, sometimes depending on what was happening and situations, the object would populate in very different orders. Simply because, well, objects, you don't pull it by indexes, you pull it by key value pairs. So what we're needing to do is to ensure that the order of the array is the same as our spreadsheet. So that's what we're going to use the LEIDs for. So we want our LEIDs. And then the last thing we're going to need, of course, is our employee ID. So we're going to send all of this over to our server side. So let's save this first. And let's go create this. So we'll go over to our main.js. Scroll all the way down. This is going to be right after our retrieve. So this will be update of prod. Let's create our function. There we go. So the first thing we're going to need to do here is find the index of this employee ID. And we can simply do that because we did it before. We did it right here. So let's grab this. And it's not going to receive the number because it's not getting a number. It's not getting that data. It's going to get this employee ID. This is where we're storing that data. Okay, and then let's create a comment here just for the sake of commenting. There we go. And if it finds that employee number, we want it to do something. If it doesn't find it, it's going to return a -1 number. So we can use that -1 to create an if statement. So let's create our if. And this if is going to be if num index is greater than -1. Now remember, it's a number, so we don't put it in quotations. Then we want it to do something. And what we want it to do is first essentially grab that row of data. Now, when we think about grabbing that row of data, we're not simply physically grabbing and moving it. What we want to do is copy it. And when we look at our spreadsheet here, our spreadsheet is not 0 based, it's 1 based. So 1, 2, 3, 4. When this comes over to us as an array, or when we move it to an array, it's then going to be on a 0 based. So we're going to have to adjust 1 for that. And the other thing that we're going to have to adjust for is we don't want to include our header. So we're going to have to adjust 1 for that. So what we're going to need to do actually is create another variable. Let's call that variable row index. And this row index is going to be equal to the num index plus 2. And once we get this functional, we will change this, and I'll show you why we need to adjust for this. Okay, there we go. So now what we can do is work on our copy. Copy row over to archive. And we created our archive global variable up here. So now we have that sheet stored in a global variable to where we can call it. So let's create another variable, row data. And our row data is going to grab the information based on our row index from our sheet. Now, our sheet is our employee data piece. And we want to grab that by getting our range. And the row that we want isn't going to be an integer. It's going to be this row index. Whatever that row came back as. That's the column that we need to go down. And then we want to get our first column is the starting point. And then we want to only include one row, but we want to include all those columns. So what we can simply do is sheet.get last column. And then what we're wanting with this is to get the values of everything. Now that this is stored in a variable called row data, we can now send this over to our archive sheet and simply append row. Haven't overwritten anything yet. We haven't overwritten anything yet. Simply just appending that row. So now, since this is essentially an array of an array, this is going to come to us, well, not necessarily an array of an arrays, but this is in an array format. So we need to think about what array. So let's actually create something here. Let me save this. And let's just put in 46. And instead of doing this, let's actually log this row data out and see what we got. So let's save that. And then let's run this modify record here. Log it out and see what we got. So as you can see, it is coming to us as a two-dimensional array. There's arrays inside this. And because this is the 0 index, we need to isolate that. So instead of just calling this append row and leaving it be, we need to tell it what it's actually appending. And what we're wanting it to append is not that full two-dimensional array. We are wanting to go into that two-dimensional array and grab the 0 index. And then that way it will just simply populate that data. Because remember, get values, anytime you use get values, it's going to come to you as a two-dimensional array. So this is let's turn this back to employee ID. Okay, good. So now we archived it. So now let's work on updating that. Updating by first creating our order. And we created our order using this LE IDs. So let's create a row variable. And I believe we did that up here already. So let's see. Yep, we can just grab this whole thing right here. We don't have to retype. There we go. And let's make sure that this is what we're wanting to do. It's using our LEIDs. Yep. We're mapping that based on our key, which is coming to us in our records. And if it's empty, then we just return our empty string. Okay, and then we have our user email here, our date, new date. Let's actually do this. Instead of that, let's give our new date. Let's do that. Because this way it will return the date as well as, it's just going to be a clean date. Instead of that whole date time zone thing, we can just return it to our local string. Okay, and then this isn't going to be date. This is going to be clean date. And we'll probably I'll go up there and do the same thing with our create record. And then it's going to take this, create the array, and add that to the row. And our row is this order. Okay, good. And then what we want to do is we're not wanting to append it. So let's get rid of that. We're wanting to go and find the range. So let's go to our sheet, get range again. Oops, spelled that all wrong. There we go. And the row that we're wanting to get, of course, is our row index, whatever index it is. Starting at the first column, we want to include one row. And then what we want to do is not necessarily go all the way over to the very end. Because remember, if something's missing, we're going to return empty. So instead of using this last column thing, I would like to just simply go over however many columns based on the final row length. And then we want to, instead of get the values, let's set values. And remember, when we set the values, it has to be in the form of a two-dimensional array. And right now, our final row is in a one-dimensional array. So to turn that into a two-dimensional array, we simply add on another level there. Essentially overwrites that row located at the row index. Okay, perfect. And then since we have an if statement here, we got to give it something else in case it doesn't happen that way. So we can simply return not found. Okay, good. So let's save this and give it a go. Let's refresh this, go to our records, and we will let's pick 39 here. Okay, 39. Yeah, that's a good one. That one will work. So we first want our users to retrieve the record. Okay, so it's retrieved. Now we want them to go in and actually use or enter what has changed. Maybe this person's getting a different name. So let's say updated name. So now when we press that button, what should happen here is our function should go down, find 39. So this row right here, copy this, send it over to our archive, append a new row here, and then go back to our employee data, and then go back to 39 again, and then set the values, the updated values that it received from our client side. So let's go back over here and see if we made any errors or it works. So we want to update the record now with that change. We want to hit process. I thought we cleared it. So let's go back over here to this update name. So that worked. So it went down to 39, updated the name. And then let's check to see if it archived it. And there we go. Now we know that it archived what was there because of the record date. And then our employee data has our new information here. Okay, good. Good. So let's go back to our code here because that I believe we put in our update a reset record. And no, we did not. Okay, so what we would like to do is reset the record after it's been updated. So let's come up here, grab this reset record. This is the function that we created. Okay, good. Good. All right, so now we have the update piece done. So let's work on just simply the archive. And archive is simply going to be very similar to this, except we just don't need the set values piece. So let's come back up here and create our archive record. And let's just simply call that, we can call it archive. That'll work. We want to run archive record. Yep. That'll work perfectly. So let's come down over here. Oh, actually, let's go back here real quick before we get started with that one. So let's go back to our main GS because I wanted to show you why we add this too. So if we were to delete this too, and then let's come back over here to our data. And let's say we want to grab number 50, right? Number 50. Actually, let's do 40. We haven't done 40 yet. So if we were to do 40 and we didn't add on those two, what would actually be copied over and adjusted would be 38 because we're not accounting for the zero based. Yep. So if we come over here and do 40 right here, and we are not accounting for that zero based as well as the header, it's not going to add those two. It's going to pull this 38. So let's look at 40. So come back over here. We will refresh our update screen here. There we go. So let's open this thing up again and we'll do 40 this time. First thing we want to do is retrieve it. We're going to have to build in something because we just don't want someone to mash update because that's not going to work. So we'll build in some safeguards and some steering abilities here. Let's last name 40. There we go. So now if we pressed update and then come back over here and see what happened, you'll see that it updated it correctly. But our archive, it archived 38 because initially that's what it was going in and grabbing. And we don't want 30. That's why we're having to adjust, or 38. We're wanting to adjust for the header and the zero based. So that is the reason why we add the +2. If we were to do +1, then it would do 39. If we did +3, then it would go essentially past it. So that's the reason for the +2 there. Okay, so now let's go back over here to our operations and create our archive function here real quick. So we'll do CRUD archive. And we're actually going to do and use essentially this whole piece here. So as you can see, we are, got to create the function first. We are repeating ourselves, which means that this is going to be a prime example a prime opportunity to condense a lot of this. Well, let's get it functional, and then we can condense it a little bit later on. So now we're not going to need this LEID piece because we're not going to do anything with it. We're not setting the order. So let's make sure we have, yep, that's fine. So let's go over to our, nope, it's not modify records. This should simply be file. Let's just call it file records for now. Let's come over here to our main GS and let's create this file function. It's going to take the records and it's also going to take the employee ID. There we go. So now what we're going to do here is we're not going to really override anything. What we're going to do is simply get our imp number index. So this piece, we're going to need that. And then we're also going to need to run our if statement. So we're going to need to do all this, except we don't really need to return not found. Just have it do nothing. And we're not actually going to, I'll start at the top here. So we're going to grab our employee number from the ID. And then if that is greater than -1, we're going to create a variable for this function called row ID index. We'll change that, make it a little bit easier. Let's just get it functional. And we're going to add 2 to adjust for all that stuff. And then we're going to want to go up and grab the values. Yes. Starting at that row index, going over 1. Yep, we'll get the values. And we are going to want to copy that over just like that time. Except the one thing that we're not going to need to do is we just simply need to get the values. We're not overriding anything. So essentially we don't need the user date that we're simply just appending the row here. So let's go up and grab this. And we're not doing anything with this. We're not overriding anything, actually. We don't need any of this. So let's just delete that. We're needing to grab the values and then simply archive it. And then what we need to do is delete from that sheet our employee database. And to do that, you can see that we have this method here, delete row. And let's tell it what row it is we want to delete, because you could put a number in here, but we already have it, and it is this row index. And again, if we did not have this +2, it would essentially subtract 2 and delete the row that is 2 above where we're trying to target. So we don't want to do that. Yeah, that should be good. So let's go check this out and give it a go. Actually, we don't need this records piece either. We simply just need the employee ID. Um, don't need that. Which means we can get rid of all that as well. Okay, there we go. Probably should have just retyped that or just typed it from scratch instead of trying to copy that over because we really didn't need any of it. Simply just the employee ID. All right, so let's go ahead and give this a go. And let's pick one that we created, but we don't really need. So we went up to 50. So let's just do 54. So we'll try to archive 54. Let's just say 54 retired. So let's come down here. First, we're wanting to retrieve the information. Okay, yep. This is one of the testing ones. Okay, good. So now we're not going to update it this time. What we're going to do is archive. Okay, it reset. Now let's go over to our sheet here, and we did 54. So 52, 53. Yep. So now 54 should be over here in archive. And there it is. Perfect. So we've created the update and delete version. So now we have a essentially fully functioning create, read, update, and in our case, archive. Very simple HRIS system, really. So I'm going to end this video here, and I'm going to go through and figure out what it is that we can clean and update. Maybe I'll make another video in between our next video. And then after I get that cleanup done, we'll have a video on really how to interact with our user, because trusting, a lot of hands may come through this. And if we're looking at this choose action, we want to be able to put in some safeguards here, because we don't want to retrieve a record and then just archive it or update it. So maybe what we'll do for, initially is to create somewhat of a modal box that pops up with instructions or notifications or something like that. So look for that series coming out. And until next time, please take care.